Before we begin, this story contains descriptions of a maritime disaster, including deaths from drowning and hypothermia. If that's something you need to step away from, we understand. Take care of yourself first. This episode's narration is AI-generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. March 6, 1987. The passenger ferry Herald of Free Enterprise pushes away from the dock at Zeebrugge, Belgium. 539 people aboard, crew and passengers. The ship accelerates toward open water. 90 seconds later, it capsizes. 193 people die in the dark, freezing water. The bow doors were wide open. The man whose job it was to close them was asleep in his cabin. You're listening to the Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, a ferry disaster that killed nearly 200 people because no one checked the doors. The Herald of Free Enterprise was a Spirit-class roll-on roll-off ferry. 132 meters long, 8 decks labeled A through H. She could carry 460 passengers and 80 crew. Cars, trucks, and buses drove straight onto G deck through massive clamshell bow doors at the front of the ship. Mark Stanley was the assistant BOH son, 25 years old. On March 6th, his job was simple. After the vehicles finished loading, close the bow doors before the ship left port. Captain David Lurie stood on the bridge 6 decks above. From there, he couldn't see the bow doors. The design of the ship put the wheelhouse too far forward. There were no indicator lights to tell him whether the doors were open or closed. The Herald was working an unusual route that day. Her normal run was Dover to Calais. But on March 6th, she was covering the Dover to Zeebrugge service. Zeebrugge's link span, the loading ramp at the dock, wasn't built for Spirit-class ferries. It couldn't reach E-deck, where vehicles normally loaded. The crew compensated. They filled the bow ballast tanks with seawater to raise the ship higher in the water. That let the link span reach G-deck. It was a workaround. It added weight to the bow, and it was normal procedure for this route. By 1700 hours, loading was complete. 81 cars, 3 buses, 47 trucks, 459 passengers, many of them traveling on cheap promotional fares from the Sun newspaper. Mark Stanley finished his work on G-deck. He'd supervised the loading, helped secure the vehicles. He was tired. He went to his cabin to rest. He fell asleep. The bow doors on a roll-on roll-off ferry aren't small. They're massive steel clamshells that fold upward and seal the front of the vehicle deck. Closing them takes time. It's a manual operation. Someone has to be there to do it. It was Stanley's job. But he was asleep. Micro Cliffhanger 1. At 18:05, the Herald of Free Enterprise cast off her moorings and began moving toward the outer harbor. No one had closed the bow doors. First Officer Leslie Sable had been the last officer on G-deck. He'd left the deck assuming Mark Stanley would arrive to close the doors. Stanley hadn't arrived. Sable didn't wait. He left. Terence Ailing, the BOH son, was also on G-deck during loading. He saw the open doors. He didn't close them. Later, at the formal inquiry, he was asked why. His answer was direct. It was not my duty. Captain Lurie on the bridge assumed the doors were closed. Ships don't leave port with their bow doors open. That's the rule. He had no reason to think otherwise. He had no indicator lights. He couldn't see the doors from where he stood. He trusted his crew. The ship accelerated. By 1824, she was passing the outer mole, the breakwater at the harbor entrance, at 18.9 knots, 35 kilometers per hour. The bow doors faced forward. They were wide open. A roll-on, roll-off ferry's vehicle deck is an open space. No internal watertight subdivisions. It's designed that way so vehicles can drive straight through. That design creates a problem. If water gets onto that deck, it doesn't stay in one place. It sloshes. It shifts the ship's center of gravity. Naval architects call it the free surface effect. The Herald's bow doors were acting as scoops. Micro Cliffhanger 2. Water began flooding onto G-deck. thousands of tons of seawater rushing in through the open bow doors. The ship listed 30 degrees to port. She righted herself briefly. Then she went over completely. The entire event took 90 seconds. At 1825, all power was lost. The ship went dark. Passengers were thrown sideways in total darkness. The Herald capsized completely onto her port side. She came to rest on a sandbar in shallow water, 1 kilometer offshore. If the captain hadn't made a last-second turn to starboard, if the ship had capsized in deeper water instead of on that sandbar, the death toll would have been total 539 people. The sandbar was the only reason anyone survived at all. Half the ship was underwater. Half was above the surface. People were trapped inside in the dark, in compartments that were now filling with freezing North Sea water. The temperature was just above freezing. Hypothermia sets in fast. The crew of a nearby dredger saw the Herald's lights disappear. They raised the alarm at 1837. They reported what they'd seen. The bow doors were wide open. Captain Wolfgang Schreider, commanding the ferry Gabriele Ver, was nearby. He maneuvered his ship alongside the capsized Herald. Belgian Navy helicopters arrived overhead. Royal Navy divers entered the flooded compartments, working in pitch darkness through freezing water. They pulled survivors and bodies from the wreck. Schreider stayed at the scene, coordinating rescue efforts from his own ship. But the tide was rising. By late evening, the water level inside the Herald was climbing. The rescuers were forced to stop. They couldn't continue safely. Some survivors were still alive inside the ship when the rescue teams halted for the night. They died of hypothermia in the dark, waiting for help that couldn't reach them. By morning, 193 people were dead. The formal investigation was led by Justice Barry Sheen, acting as wreck commissioner. It concluded in July 1987. The findings were damning. Mark Stanley had been asleep. That was true. Leslie Sable had left G-Deck without verifying the doors were closed. Terence Ailing had seen the open doors and done nothing. Captain Lurie had no way to check from the bridge. All of that was true, but the Sheen inquiry didn't stop there. It found what it called a disease of sloppiness, a systemic failure that infected Townsend Thor U-Sen from the boardroom to the car deck. The company had been asked repeatedly to install indicator lights on the bridge so captains could see whether the bow doors were open or closed. The requests came from the captains themselves. They knew the design flaw. They'd asked for a fix. Townsend Thor U-Sen's directors denied every request. They considered the indicators unnecessary, too expensive, not worth the trouble. The company's culture prioritized speed and cost-cutting over safety. Ferries were pushed to depart on time, no matter what. Corners were cut. Shortcuts became routine. "Not my duty" became an acceptable answer from crew members who'd learned that asking questions or raising safety concerns wouldn't change anything. Mark Stanley was asleep, but the company had been asleep far longer. Herald of Free Enterprise was raised from the seabed on April 24, 1987. She was scrapped in Taiwan the following year. The disaster led to new regulations for roll-on roll-off ferries. Bow door indicators became mandatory. Watertight subdivisions were required on vehicle decks. Ships had to prove they could remain stable even if the vehicle deck flooded. But 193 people died because a company decided indicator lights were too expensive and a crew member fell asleep. The cruelty isn't the 90 seconds. It's the years of sloppiness that made those 90 seconds inevitable. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.